Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Built Heritage Subcommittee for November 12th. I'd like to call our members to order, please. We have regrets today from Councillor Moffat. Are there any declarations of interest this morning? Seeing none. Confirmation of minutes. These are the minutes from October 21st, 2019. Are the minutes from that meeting confirmed? Confirmed, thank you. Okay, we have two items on our agenda today. The first one is application for demolition and new construction at 58 Florence Street, a property located in the Centertown Heritage Conservation District. We're just going to go in the order of the agenda today. If there's anyone interested in speaking on either this item or on the Heritage Register item, a reminder, we do have a sign-up sheet up at the front of the room by the door, and you can register there if you wish to speak today. I've asked for a short presentation from our staff on this, and I believe it's David Maloney will give us a quick overview of this report. David?
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the Built Heritage Subcommittee. The application before you is for the demolition of an existing building at 54 Florence Street and the construction of a 3-story apartment building in its place. The property is located on the south side of Florence Street between Bank and Kent Street, adjacent to a 4-story contemporary condo building and across from the Chinese Canadian Heritage Centre at Trillium Hall. The property is designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act, located within the Centertown Heritage Conservation District. The existing house to be demolished is vacant. The house was structurally damaged due to a shoring failure subsequent to the construction of the condo building to the west in 2011. Collard and Associates and John Cook and Associates have assessed the structure and determined that restoration is not feasible. The image on the left shows the proximity between the subject building and the adjacent house to the east at 54 Florence, while the image on the right shows the side yard between the house to be demolished and the contemporary condo building next door. This view is looking east from Kent Street at the corner of Kent and Florence. The subject property is identified with the arrow. And this is the north side of Florence Street, looking west. You will notice a consistent height of between 2.5 to 3 stories, with red brick being the dominant cladding material. The 3-story flat roof building at 43 Florence, visible on the photo in the right, this building here, is similar in form, scale, massing, and materiality as the proposed new development and is located on a similarly sized lot. Oops. Sorry about that. These images show the subject property along the south side of the street. The first image is looking east towards Bank Street, while the second is looking west towards Kent Street. These are the front, rear, and west side elevations of the proposed new construction. The primary cladding material is red brick, with patterned metal panels framing the paired windows. Glass railings span the perimeter of the rooftop terrace. Please note that a minor zoning amendment to address the lot area, lot width, side yard setback, and the size of the rooftop, given the built form. This is a low-rise apartment building, so those variances will be required. As well, there is a concurrent site plan control application that has been submitted for this project. The site plan on the left shows a simple rectangular plan. The landscape plan in the middle shows 4 trees to be removed to accommodate the new construction, with 4 new trees to be planted in their place. The result will be 1 tree in the front yard, which will be a street tree, with 4 new trees and 1 existing tree in the backyard. The tree in the foreground in the photo showing the front yard on the left will remain. In the backyard, these existing trees will be removed with 4 new trees to be planted. With time, these new trees in the rear will contribute to the historically important tree canopy typically found within the middle portion of blocks in Centertown. These shaded green spaces provide sites for respite within the urban core and are a very important characteristic. The proposed 9-unit apartment building is flat-roofed, clad with red brick. The recessed front entrance is characteristic of neighboring heritage buildings. The front facade of the building features paired multi-pane windows, which are stacked on all 3 floors, with patterned black metal spandrel panels framing the windows in the projecting bay. Through consultation with the applicant team, which included a heritage consultant, the project has improved in the following ways. Red brick has been extended to all 4 facades and will be the only cladding material visible from the street, with the exception of the patterned metal panels used on the recessed bay above the entrance and the framing of the paired windows on the front facade. The window style and divisions have been modified to better fit the heritage context. A decorative metal cornice has been added across the top of the projecting bay. I guess I could do this. To make up for the required removal of trees on the property, an equal number of new trees are proposed to be planted. So, staff recommend the Built Heritage Subcommittee approve the recommendations listed on the screen and outlined in the report. Thank you for listening to this presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. We can come back to questions for staff in a moment. We have 2 delegations registered. We have David Fleming representing Heritage Ottawa and Murray Chown from Novatech. Do either of you need to speak if the committee is prepared to carry this one? Murray?
I certainly don't need to speak.
Okay, David?
Likewise, Mr. Chairman, we've already completed our discussion, and they've addressed some of our concerns. Please.
Okay, thank you. Do any of the committee members have questions for staff? Member Podolsky.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm certainly going to support the application. I had the following question for staff. And this has to do with the report itself. In previous reports, we have always had an outline of the other planning approvals that are required. You had verbally mentioned minor rezoning, but I think that it would always be helpful to the committee to have an idea of what the other planning approvals are required. And you mentioned certain setbacks, I believe, in passing, but my question is there a heritage overlay on this property?
Yes, Mr. Chair, there is a heritage overlay on the property, so that will also require variance through the minor rezoning amendment. So those provisions, the report for the...
So there will be, in the minor rezoning...
Yes, that's correct.
The setbacks or heights, and also relief from the heritage overlay, for instance, section 60.1, where a building is demolished and is rebuilt.
Yes.
That will have to be part of the application for minor rezoning.
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Yeah, so the setbacks that I referenced refer to the underlying zoning, but you're correct that section 60, the heritage overlay, also requires a variance to some extent as well.
Good, and could we just request that in future reports where there are other planning applications that are needed, that they just be mentioned in the report? Thank you.
Absolutely.
Any other questions from committee members? All right, are the report recommendations carried? Carried, thank you. Okay, we'll move on to the second item, which is additions to the Heritage Register. And we'll give staff just a moment to switch out there. Again, if you are interested in speaking, we do have a sign-up sheet at the front of the room. This is the final report related to the Heritage Inventory Project, which was a strategic priority from the last term of City Council. And since 2016, Heritage staff have reviewed more than 30,000 buildings now across the entire city. So this report in front of us today is the last stage of that process. So we do have a number of delegations signed up to speak. We're going to start with the staff update and then proceed to the delegations. And staff have recommended, just like back in June when we received the last report, if committee members wish to remove any property from the list, staff would reconsider properties for either of these reasons. One is if a new objection is received today that staff had not have had the opportunity to consider, or if there's new information provided today that would warrant a reassessment. And this report goes to City Council on November 27th, so a couple weeks from now. So staff would aim to complete any reassessments before that goes to Council in a couple of weeks. So we have Cash Slazero and Avery Marshall, who will give us an overview of the report in front of us today.
Good morning. Thank you for having us this morning. My name is Cass Glazero. I'm a researcher with the Heritage Inventory Project. I'm here with my colleague Avery Marshall and our Manager of Heritage Services, Dana Collings. So we're talking today about our citywide report, Additions to the Heritage Register. This report culminates the results of a multi-year study known as the Heritage Inventory Project. So the Heritage Inventory Project was developed as a way to identify properties to list on the Heritage Register and to ensure that the Heritage Register is comprehensive and up to date. Following completion of the Heritage Inventory Project, the city will have a reliable planning document to consult when reviewing development proposals or permit applications. It will also serve as a publicly accessible source of information about cultural heritage properties. The project promotes enhanced public understanding about and appreciation for Ottawa's cultural heritage and about heritage planning tools and practices. So a brief review about what it means to be listed on the Heritage Register as opposed to being designated is as follows. So listed or a non-designated property must have cultural heritage value or interest. There is no requirement to notify owners before or after adding a property to the register. No heritage status is registered on title with the property. No alterations on interior or exterior alterations, additions, or renovations, and 60 days notice is required prior to application for demolition. Designated properties, on the other hand, must meet more stringent criteria under Regulation 906 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Notice of intent to designate is required. Bylaw is registered on title. Applications for alterations require a heritage permit. An application for demolition under the Ontario Heritage Act would not be permitted in most cases. So in total, 502 properties are proposed for addition to the Heritage Register as non-designated listings. So as we said in the previous slide, these are not designated properties, and there's a notable difference between a listed property and a designated property. So buildings that we've identified through this phase of the project include residences, places of worship, community buildings, and commercial buildings. And we have also identified some bridges and lighthouses. So each structure was assessed for its cultural heritage value according to a methodology that considered both design and context. In order to merit listing on the Heritage Register, a property had to have been built before 1980. It had to meet the design test and reflect the neighborhood heritage statement attributes. The design test required that the building express a particular style, showcase local designer materials, feature architectural elements, demonstrate original built form, and that any changes, alterations, etc. to the building are sympathetic to the original building. Generally, only the facade or facades clearly visible from the right-of-way were considered during assessment. Staff prepared neighborhood heritage statements for each study area. The statements summarize the historical settlement patterns, significant historical themes, and heritage attributes of the area, and those attributes are considered during assessment. So for this final phase of the report, public consultation followed a similar model as the previous reports. So a notification package was mailed to all impacted owners. And that notification package contained a letter outlining the Heritage Inventory Project and providing staff contact information. It contained a brochure explaining the Heritage Inventory Project and answers to frequently asked questions related to being a property listed on the register. It contained a flyer listing dates and times of public information sessions and a drop-in day, and an information sheet about the property being proposed for the register. So we held 2 public information sessions this time around in Ward 7 and Ward 19, and we had a rescheduled drop-in day at the West Carleton Client Center, which we had scheduled for May of this year but canceled due to flooding in that ward. Councillors, community associations, and heritage organizations were also notified. So as with the last report, we tracked all responses and feedback from property owners, residents, and stakeholders following the notifications, information sessions, and drop-in days. Responses included questions and comments about the heritage inventory projects, additional information about properties supplied by the property owners, requests for reassessments, and requests for removals from the proposed list. We also had several property owners request applications for designation. Most of the properties included in this report are located in wards 1, 5, 7, and 19, and that's the light yellow area on the map. These are properties that were originally scheduled to be included in our June 2019 report, but were postponed from addition to the register at that time due to flooding in the spring of 2019 and the tornado in the fall of 2018. The report also includes properties that were identified after the June report, as well as 4 properties that were deferred from addition to the register in June. So following the conclusion of the Heritage Inventory Project this fall, staff estimate that the Heritage Register will contain approximately 7,595 properties. This is total based on number of listed and designated properties across the city. Of the 3,960 listed properties, 3,421 were identified through the Heritage Inventory Project. So a couple key facts about the project. It was a massive undertaking. It was the first and only citywide heritage study conducted across Ottawa. More than 30,000 buildings were reviewed, and staff estimate that over 12,000 photographs of buildings were taken. So once the report is, assuming the report is approved and the Heritage Inventory Project is complete, all results will be made available on ottawa.ca and on Geo Ottawa. So we've taken a screen cap from a section of Geo Ottawa where the heritage layer contains listed and designated properties, as well as properties in heritage conservation districts. So the listed properties are indicated by blue triangles, designated properties are purple triangles, and the heritage conservation districts are yellow shaded areas. So our report is recommending that the Built Heritage Subcommittee recommend that Council approve the addition of 502 properties to the City of Ottawa's Heritage Register as non-designated listings, to approve technical amendments to addresses listed in Document 9, and to discontinue use of the Heritage Reference List. And following approval of this report will have completed the Heritage Inventory Project. It will have updated the Heritage Register in all remaining areas across the city, and it will have achieved Strategic Initiative 44A, which was a major council strategic initiative. So that concludes our report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we will come back to staff for questions afterwards, although as we go through delegations, we may have questions for staff as we go. We have 5 delegations registered to speak. I'm not sure if they're all here yet, but the first is Gordon Ryan. Mr. Ryan, are you here today? Come on up to the front. While you're making your way, I just wanted to check with staff. So we have, I believe, 8 pieces of correspondence submitted to the clerk's office. Have staff been copied on those? Are staff aware of those? And have you had a chance to review and assess any of them? Any people have written to the committee prior to today?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So any property owner who submitted to us or Eric, we reassessed all properties regardless of whether or not there was a request to be removed from the register based on new information, belief that the project or the property doesn't meet the criteria for the project, or any other reason. We just did a preemptive reassessment of all properties.
Okay, and there were none off of that correspondence list that would need to be reassessed between now and council, as far as you're aware?
We're not aware of any, although with a few, maybe the ones that are coming in today, we would consider reassessing. Yeah.
Okay, and our committee coordinator is making notes if there's any properties that the committee feels warrant reassessment before this goes to council. Our committee coordinator is keeping a tally of addresses and will provide direction to staff after our delegations. So, Mr. Ryan, pardon me, Gordon Ryan, I have your address here as 4334 Upper Dwyer Hill Road. Is that correct? Okay, so committee members 4334 Upper Dwyer Hill. Committee members are probably looking this up on Google Maps to see the street view, so we're familiar with what we're looking at. But okay, you have 5 minutes, Mr. Ryan. Just press your button. There you go.
Good morning, and thank you for letting me speak today at this subcommittee meeting. I received your Heritage Inventory Project brochure. Was first quarter this year, was before the flood. I have some concerns with my property being on this register list. I submitted my concerns to Mr. Pilot about a month ago, and I outlined why I feel my property should not be on this register list. My three main points were I was concerned with being on this list would affect my property value. I did get a response back saying that there's been no known reason why being on this heritage list would affect my property value. I just want to make aware that I don't live within the actual urban area of Ottawa. I live almost 40 kilometers west of Carp. While I know in some areas of the city, being on the heritage registrar may not affect value or in some cases increase value, I'm in a very rural area, and I do not believe that being on this list will, or I do believe it will affect my resale value. My second concern that I had was that I understand there's not a lot of restrictions with this inventory project, but I am concerned that as time passes, councils change, this committee members change, that we may start getting more stringent conditions, or even, there may be different phases of heritage which will affect me in the future. The response I received back from the committee was that it was up to the province. The province was driving this, but in discussions with Ms. Fullerton, who's my local MPP, she told me that it actually is the mandate of the City of Ottawa of how this project is enforced. And my third concern, when I read through your pamphlet, two of the items for the criteria award demonstrates original building massing, shape, and volume, and any additions or modifications respect the original form. Now, I've recently purchased this house about 5 years ago, and from what I can dig up through the building records, approximately early 90s, the previous owner put a fairly significant addition onto my house. It does not match the existing brick facade. It's modern white siding. It's increased the footprint by, it's almost doubled the entire footprint. They added a kitchen, living room, bathroom, mudroom, laundry room, and a two-port garage. So I put these concerns forward to the committee, and the response I got back was, because we're looking at my property, looking at the front door, looking northward, it didn't count. But my house is located in the middle of a 500-acre field. You can see this addition from every single direction, except if you're standing right in the front door. So I disagree with the response I got back from the committee saying it's okay because we're only looking from the front door. So I'm here today to ask the committee to reconsider putting my house on this registrar, as I don't believe I even meet the criteria as outlined in the brochure.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ryan. Are there any questions for Mr. Ryan or for staff on this particular property? Councillor Brockington.
It's for staff, Mr. Chair, and that is, could staff just clarify, I thought that if there were modifications to the structure that they would automatically not be considered on the register. Can you just clarify?
Thank you for the question, Chair. So, no, a number of properties, in fact, many properties that we've identified through the Heritage Inventory Project have had alterations to them. A lot of them have been reclad, the roofing has changed, porches removed, et cetera. But we don't look at additions at the rear of the property. We don't go on private property. So in order to be consistent with our assessment, we only assess what we can see looking head on at the property unless it's on a corner lot and the house was designed to kind of take advantage of that corner lot. Like there are many properties as you approach them, especially in the rural area, that you can see that there are additions on the back. I mean, we don't expect people to live in 18th or 19th century size houses, so we understand that additions have been made at the sides and rear, and it hasn't been a problem in terms of meeting the criteria. Largely, in the case of this house, the main heritage building is still visible.
Just to save additional questions perhaps in the future, can you just briefly explain to me if modifications are made to an existing structure in the front or side, what has to happen for you to determine not to add it to the registry?
Something like a porch that, if there was a wraparound porch on a building, if it was to be enclosed such that the front facade of the building is hidden behind the addition, if a one-story addition was put onto the front of a two-story, say Ontario, like traditional Ontario Gothic cottage, if it projected out of the front of the building, if a third story was added to a building that was built as a two-story and the roof line was altered significantly, things like that.
Any other questions? Councillor El-Shantiri.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to, maybe staff can clarify to the resident. As to my knowledge, he visited his local MPP, and the MPP denied the provincial government has any involvement. Can you tell me who has asked for this inventory to be evaluated by the city?
Thank you. The city, it was a council initiative to do the Heritage Inventory Project and to undertake that project to update the Heritage Register. The Ontario Heritage Act requires municipalities to keep a Heritage Register of properties. So the Heritage Register requirement is mandated by the Ontario Heritage Act, and the way that we updated our register in the city of Ottawa was council direction.
But the Heritage Ontario Act is the one mandated us to take that inventory. Is that correct?
No, council directed us to do the inventory, to update the register, and it's the Heritage Act that requires municipalities to have a register. The inventory project was a project within, it was a city-specific project, and the goal was to update the Heritage Register.
Now, Mr. Chair, would staff be revisiting the property? Because as we heard, staff did not go behind and see the new addition. Actually, I believe there was 2 additions, if I remember correctly from the presentation. Would staff be going back and with the permission from the homeowner to visit that site?
Let staff answer.
So we reviewed the photographs that we took of the property from the right-of-way facing the front of the building, as is how we've assessed all of our properties. We did take a look at Google Street View, kind of looking at approaching the house from both directions along Upper Dwyer Hill Road. And again, for the most part, the addition has minimal impact on what is visible from the right-of-way. The one side where the addition is visible, if you were to take the side of the house, the addition is only really covering the back quarter of one side of the house. But from the right-of-way, the front of the house is easily identifiable as the Heritage Building, and same with from the other side.
So my question again to you, would you be willing to go visit the property between now and the council meeting and see, with his permission, obviously, the homeowner?
I mean, we could look at it again, certainly. We would do it from the right-of-way, like we wouldn't go onto the private property because that's not part of our assessment criteria. So we could certainly go back out there, and from the road, from directly in front of the house, we can reassess the property.
Any other questions, Councillor?
I'm just, so the residents here, and I see he's shaking his head, he's willing to allow staff on a property to assess it. I don't understand why staff say we can assess from the side of the road, where he's trying to make the argument the house has 2 new additions built to the house. I know the front of the house is still show on a Google map is still stand, but I mean, if he's willing to show you the house, I don't understand why would be not to go visit and speak to the owner on this one.
I'd like to ask staff two questions to clarify. Mr. Ryan has indicated that he's already contacted staff about this, so this isn't a new objection that's coming to staff's attention, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
And is any information that Mr. Ryan provided today new information that staff was not aware of?
No.
I believe this committee should stick to the 2 criteria that we have set and the process that we set for staff in terms of reevaluations. And in this case, I would suggest to my committee members that an on-site visit is not going to change staff's evaluation, nor is it part of the process that we've set as part of the overall heritage review. We have 30,000 properties that we've identified, and after today's meeting, potentially 3,500, is it, buildings that have been added. It's a point-in-time assessment, and we've set the criteria to simplify and to streamline the process as much as possible. And in this case, since there's no new objection, nor is there any new information, I don't think a site visit would be warranted. That would be my opinion. I'd be interested to hear if any committee members think otherwise on this one.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I certainly support what you say, what you've just said. I think that the criteria has been set. Staff, in my view, has shown due diligence. No new information has come before them this morning. And as you point out, there are thousands of properties at stake, and we certainly cannot expect staff to make individual site visits. And certainly my own personal opinion is that viewing this house from Upper Dwyer Hill Road shows the heritage character of this property is very, very visible from the street as you approach it. Many late 19th century properties have additions. It's not unusual to see them at the rear or to the side. It shouldn't compromise the fact that there is a significant portion of this property where the heritage building remains intact and highly visible. Thank you.
Are there any other questions from committee members on this property? Member Conforti.
I just wanted to ask staff, Mr. Ryan mentioned that he's concerned that the rules might change and that, new heritage programs might come into place that would include his property in a more significant way. I just want to make sure that that question was addressed with him and that he was reassured that being on this list does not mean like a grandfathered in program in the future. I just want to make sure that he understands the implications and that he's assured a little bit that it won't affect his property in the future. I don't know if that specific question was answered for him, but.
Thank you. Yeah, when we spoke at the West Carleton Client Service Center and then again by email, I laid out that the rules for the Heritage Register are set by the province under the Heritage Act, and that it's not up to the city to suddenly blanket designate all the properties. Like, we just don't have the authority to do that. And I mean, I can't say what future provincial governments are going to do, but that was the best I could offer. But yeah.
All right. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Ryan. Our next delegation is Mark Alexander, Lodge Secretary for the Huntley Loyal Orange Lodge, number 55, which is at 3003 Carp Road. Is Mr. Alexander here this morning? I know he had signed up previously, so perhaps with the weather, he's not able to be here. Okay. David Fleming from Heritage Ottawa.
Thank you,
Morning,
Mr.
David.
Chairman. I've spoken at previous meetings in support of the Heritage Register and the inventory program. I want to congratulate staff for all the fine work that they've done on this. And I just want to address some of the issues that have come up prior to this meeting. At the last meeting, the representative of one of the property owners said that he considered this a tripwire for designation, with the idea that the city was trying to identify all of these and eventually they would be designated under the Ontario Heritage Act. And I just wanted to, I guess, stress that the opposite is true. And what we're trying to do here and what the city is trying to do is to identify what our heritage cultural resources are potentially. And the only thing that this does, it just gives the city a second chance to look at a building before and to delay any demolition. It does not affect any additions to the building. It only deals with demolitions, and what it does is just extend the period so the city get a chance to look at it. And I think we had a very unfortunate incident here last month, and there was a building that would have been on this list, but it was demolished because the list was delayed at 910 March Road. And you realize what happened with that one. It was demolished very quickly on a Sunday, and so this committee was not able to deal with it today. So I think it's not a tripwire for designation. It's a way of identifying heritage cultural resources. It's a very positive thing, and I really don't think that to argue that it somehow affects the commercial value of a property means anything. I think it was pointed out that anytime anybody has ever applied to demolish a building since the registry has been in effect, the demolition has been approved. So it's obviously not preventing people from demolishing buildings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Mr. Fleming? All right. Thank you, David. Our next delegation is Michael Aronson. Mr. Aronson, are you here today? At 905 Killeen. I also want to point out, our colleague, Councillor Brockton, pointed out that the delegation for the Huntley Loyal Orange Lodge, they're not here today, but they did submit correspondence to the committee, so we have that on file. Okay, Mr. Aronson, it's 905 Killeen Avenue? Yes, that's right. Killeen. All right, you have 5 minutes.
Good morning, and thank you. We have mixed feelings about our house being considered to be added to the registry. On one hand, we really enjoy our house, are very proud of its looks, and have no concerns about its architectural designation. Okay? The concerns are more potentially financial in the future. Understand very well that this is just being added to the register, and at the same time, we can make all the changes to the exterior of the house that we want, which would in fact potentially, if we chose to, negate the reason for putting it on to the register in the first place. The concern is not for today. We like our house. We plan to live in it as long as we can. The concern is financial in the future. At some point when we are no longer capable of living in that house, we're going to have to sell it. And the money from that house will fund our care going down the road. At this point, because of the potential designation on the register, and as it has been explained to me by city staff, that should someone buy the house and choose to demolish it, the city requires 60 days notice to review the application, and at which case they could determine that and move it to become a heritage property, which would defeat the purpose of somebody, potentially defeat the purpose of someone buying the house should they wish to demolish it and build something else in its place. That's where our concern is, not the image of the house, how it looks. We're very proud of it, but going down the road, and again, even though the province sets the master guidelines for it, there's nothing to say that they couldn't change it in the future to make it more restrictive to people whose houses are currently on the register. So the concern, again, is not about it going on the register, it's potentially what could happen to it down the road should someone want to demolish it and then it becomes designated as a heritage property. And limited experience seeing some of the properties in the city that have been designated as heritage, like Broadview School, that's been sitting empty and boarded up for 4 years now and nothing's happened to it and probably will stay like that for a long time. Or the gas station on the corner of Island Park in Wellington, which was designated as heritage, and now is a used car lot, which defeated the whole purpose of wanting to keep it in the first place, and its original architecture. I'm concerned that something like that may happen to us down the road. So thank you for your consideration.
Okay, thank you. Do we have questions for staff or the delegate? I know Councillor Brockington had his hand up first, and then Councillor McKinney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess this was for staff first. First of all, if you're added to the register, it's not on title. It does not impact the impact assessment. Your property value will not go up or down as a result of going on the register. I think the fear that some owners have is the perception of prospective purchasers of your home, of what this may mean. Talk to me about the triggering within the 60-day period where you get the notification of the intention of the owner. What would trigger you to move a property from the register to declare it a heritage structure?
So that decision isn't made lightly. In some cases, we have a request from the community, and so staff would review the property in terms of the 906 criteria in the Heritage Act to designate, and we would have a very close look and see what associations there were, what is the design value, what is the contextual value, and ensure that it does or does not meet that. And we would discuss with staff here in Heritage Services and then potentially bring a report forward for consideration if staff found that it did meet the 906 criteria.
And
yeah, just like to put a slight addition to that. I think past practice has shown, I'm not sure the number, but is it 12? 12. So of the 12 requests that we've had in the last few years for demolition through this process, once they're on the register, every one of those ended up going through the demolition process. So the criteria that we use to assess whether or not it's worthy to be designated are very stringent. And that would be its own process as well if that was determined.
I appreciate that information. I think it's reasonable that we have homeowners who have concerns about what being added to the register means and what this may restrict them or a potential future owner of their home and property to do with the building. I think that's fair, and we should, that's human nature. But the facts are that if you're added to the register, it's not on title. MPAC doesn't know, from what I understand, and our job, as the chair and I have done with staff and some amendments to some of the documentation that we're going to provide future folks, is to clarify with them that yes, there's a process, but we don't see people who own properties on the register being impacted negatively, and that's what we have to reinforce with folks over and over again.
Okay, Councillor McKinney.
Thank you, Chair. The ward councillor for a downtown ward. Of course, I have hundreds of properties that have been designated. I've got heritage overlay. We're very proud of all of that, and I also have many new addresses that have gone on to the register. So I've had this discussion many times over the last years. You can imagine, and I guess although with an update of the registry it's not likely, but even if you weren't on the registry, if your house has got heritage and cultural value, you can still be added through the same process. So it's not the first step too. I just want to clarify that, and I think it's important that people know that if the register is not a prerequisite for designation. Is that correct? You can have your home designated whether you're on this register or not.
Yeah, that's correct. So whether or not a property is on the Municipal Heritage Register as a listed or non-designated property, under the Ontario Heritage Act, a municipality can apply or serve a notice of intent to designate on a property at any time.
Okay. Thank you. I just think that that's important to remember, that if your home does have heritage or cultural value and it meets the criteria, that could still happen. This is not a prerequisite. It's not that first step towards that. And as we've heard from staff, and I see it goes through over my desk many times, we do get demolition permits, and to date, in the last couple of years, they have all been accepted. So I'll just leave that. Thank you.
May I say something else? Just a comment?
Unfortunately, no, not in this format. Any other questions for staff or for our delegate for this property? Okay, thank you, Mr. Aronson. We have a final delegation, Lucy Webster. Is Lucy here today? Good morning. At 229 Britannia Road. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for hearing me. I'm actually not the homeowner of this property. The property is owned by my mother. I have power of attorney for her, and I'm also her realtor. I had to remove my mother from her home 3 years ago, and my brother had intended to demolish this property and build a home for his family. This spring, he changed his mind, and we began to empty the home, and I put the property on the market, and I sold it. And the property was due to close today. However, the buyer discovered when they went to the planning office that the property was due to be added to the registry today, and the buyer wanted an extension on closing. So this is a perfect example of a potential buyer having concerns over what they might be able to do with that property because of the registry, and it certainly impacted the sale of my mother's home. Whether it actually goes through or not is still unknown at this point. So that's one side of things. The other is that I'm here to request a reassessment of the property. Because she was not living in the home, we did, despite my efforts to collect her mail, I did not receive a notice. So we've not had an opportunity to go back and register our own concerns about this property. And I do actually have a number of concerns. It actually, I don't believe, is habitable at this point. A bad roofing job done several years ago and water infiltration. The ceiling is collapsing on the second floor. And while it is a charming example of Britannia Village 1.5-story cottage, it was built as a summer cottage, not as a four-season home, and as a result, she's showing her wear over the years, and 2x4 construction on 24-inch centers. The roof is doing this in the center. So yes, I'm here to request a reassessment.
Okay, thank you. I'll ask staff, first of all, are you aware of this objection or this property? Has this come up before? Is this the first time?
This is the first objection that we've heard related to this property.
And is this one where staff could do a reassessment? Do you see reason here to do a reassessment at least before council at the end of the month?
Yeah, we can do a reassessment on the property.
Okay, with committee support then, I want to direct staff to reassess the property at 229 Britannia Road prior to this report coming to council. Is that carried? Thank you. We may have questions. Joe? Any questions before we wrap up on this one? Okay, thank you. Oh, pardon me. Member Halsell.
Yes, I just had one question for staff. You follow a standard assessment for each property. You know, you shoot from the right-of-way, dead on from the road, etc., and you look for certain architectural characteristics. Do you take condition at all into account when you're doing your roadside survey? I know there are probably some difficulties with that when you're 50 feet from the front door.
Thanks for the question. So it depends on the building. I mean, if the house, has peeling paint and, window is boarded up and some shingles are missing on the roof, but everything is intact, we might say that it meets our criteria if it demonstrates original form, if there are no additions, or if the additions respect the original form of the building, if all the other elements are intact, we would probably say that it does meet the criteria. Unfortunately, we don't go inside buildings, so if there's major structural issues on the inside, we can't see that, but it doesn't affect our assessment of it from the exterior. Yeah, so yes and no.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you, Ms. Webster. I understand that Mark Alexander has arrived on the Huntley Loyal Orange Lodge on Carp Road. So this is 3003 Carp Road in Ward 5. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Apologize for being late, but I had to deal with a lot more snow out at the south end of the city than there is in here, so.
Understandable today.
Yeah. I was asked to come and speak on behalf of Mr. Dale Wilson, the president or worshipful master of Huntley Orange Lodge, number 55. That particular building, our concerns, I guess, was, how they, whoever the committee or the people that was traveling around came up with the idea of classifying that building as a heritage building just from pictures and I guess maybe whatever information you might have on file within the city. That particular building is not the original Orange Hall. I understand the previous building was up the side road a mile or so, and that we don't even use that particular building in the winter months. It's only used in the summer months, spring to fall, and granted there's a large lot there on that corner, but it's not all our property. Some of it belongs to the United Church across the street. So anyway, we're just objecting to being, I guess, forced into declaring it a heritage building. Yes, the warrant for that particular lodge was issued back in I think it was 1843 or something like that, or 1839. So it has been around, but that they haven't always met in that particular building. And that structure does have it is a two-level building. We meet in the lodge room upstairs, but the bottom part has had some water damage over the years, and we don't use it at all. And so we just object to being classified a heritage site, even though maybe the building does fit the part, I guess, from a visual look of it. And you know, so I'm just here to object that we'd prefer not to be part of being designated a heritage structure. So, and granted, you know, the membership is getting older and declining, and you know, we may have to look at possibly selling it down the road someday, and we don't want to have any restrictions in that regards. So that's about all I can say right now, if there's any questions.
Thank you. Any questions from our committee members? Councillor Brockington for staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, sir, for coming in. My question is for staff. Can you just briefly summarize for the committee the characteristics of the structure that made it to your list?
Sure, thanks for the question. So 3003 Carp Road is a concrete block structure. It's built on a symmetrical form. The main floor is raised. It's got evenly spaced windows at the front, and it's located near an intersection. It's Carp Road, and I apologize, I don't know the east-west road. Sorry? McGee Side Road, yeah. So the context is quite high there. It's located, as the owner said, across from the church. So it's got high contextual value and high architectural value. As I said, a concrete block structure. It's built in 1924. It's largely untouched, intact. The window openings are unchanged.
So if I understand correctly from our delegate, there was an original structure here, which I guess came down, and this is the replacement building that's been there since 1924?
Yeah, that's right. And there's actually a date stone in the gable end at the front of the building. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Chair Quinn.
This is a question for staff. My question is just, this gentleman, thank you for coming in. You're speaking on behalf of Mr. Wilson.
Yeah.
Did Mr. Wilson have an opportunity to contact you? Were you able to answer his concerns? Certainly, I'm hearing a misunderstanding with the terms of the building being classified as heritage, which is certainly not what happens when the building is added to a register. There's a whole other process that has to be undertaken before a building is classified as heritage under the Ontario Heritage Act. So could you just maybe address that, please?
Certainly. I had a number of email exchanges and phone calls with Mr. Wilson. And I think what he meant by, well, I'm not sure about yourself, but I know when I spoke with Mr. Wilson on the phone, he used the term heritage building in terms of a listed heritage building, and he was familiar with the difference, but did not want to participate on behalf of the lodge. Conveyed to me that he did not wish to participate in any heritage project at all. Okay.
So staff are aware of this one. Any new information today that would warrant reassessment?
I haven't heard anything, no.
What I'm going to ask, what I'm going to recommend to the lodge is reach out to the heritage staff. I think there's perhaps a bit of a miscommunication or lack of information about what this heritage register, listing on this register actually means for the lodge and any future plans you may have. So I would encourage you to reach out and set up a meeting with the staff, and they can review with you, what this does and doesn't mean in terms of being added to the register list.
Okay.
Thank you for being here this morning.
Yeah, thanks.
Are there any other general questions for staff on this report? Member Podolsky.
I have one general question, and I guess this question comes at the end of 3 years of hard work on the Heritage Inventory Project. And I think we all recognize the effort that has been put into it and what a daunting task it is. I understand that in total about 30,000 properties, buildings have been assessed, but I don't see in this report a kind of synopsis of how many of that 30,000 are being recommended or have been added to the register. There's a number which includes the designated properties as well as those on the register. Could you just give us an idea of where we are now after 3 years, having looked at 30,000 properties, which is 10,000 a year? What a daunting task. And how many are to be on the register if this is approved?
Thanks for the question. We did actually have a slide that broke down every report and how many numbers were added, but we took it out for the interest of time. But through the Heritage Inventory Project, we're estimating about 3,400 were identified and then added to the register. So of the 3,900 or so on the register as a listed property, 3,400 or so were identified through the Heritage Inventory Project.
So just to understand, about 3,400, about just over 10% of the number that were looked at have been recommended for adding to the Heritage Register. So our total Heritage Register of non-designated properties is around 3,900, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thanks.
I would offer too that the scope of the project was much bigger than those 30,000. So if you look at the number of properties in Ottawa built before 1980, and 1980 was our cutoff year, that were not FIBRO and not within federal campuses, et cetera, that actually were in scope, the number is much bigger. So probably over 100,000, but we don't have a firm number on exactly how many main buildings were reviewed as part of the project, but it is quite significant.
Just an opinion here, which maybe is out of place, but it's part of the comments before we deal with the motion or the recommendation, and that is, I think that this project deserves a kind of synopsis now of where we've come with some statistics that demonstrate to the public and to council and to all those in the heritage community the nature of the project, what its findings were, and quantitatively what the number of properties that have been added to the register have ended up with. I think it's important to help us all understand and put it all into perspective quantitatively and qualitatively. So I don't know if I'm on comments part yet, Mr. Chair, whether you're asking for others. Can I make a few more comments? Or
absolutely, yeah, continue.
I think it is, having followed the Heritage Register Inventory Project for a number of years now, I think that we ought to recognize that this was a very ambitious project with very limited resources, and in some ways, and this is not trying to be pejorative, it's quite superficial. I mean, I think that the researchers know that they didn't have the energy or the resource to really investigate the merits of each property or evaluate them in a form that will tell the property owner where they stand in terms of no heritage interest to being a candidate for designation under Part 4. So it's been a very crude process in a way, and that's, again, not being negative about it. It's the nature of the animal. But I think that it's important to be able to put as much information about the process as possible, kind of findings at this point on the city's website, so that of those thousands of properties that are now on the register, people have a better understanding of where the process has led to it and the criteria that may be used should they apply for a demolition permit or are concerned that their neighbors have a similar property that has been overlooked. So I think that it's time to focus on the educational, what did we learn from this, and what did we overlook, and be candid about that, and then be alert to the future as to what may emerge when it comes to redevelopment of these properties or moves to designate them either by the community groups or heritage districts, so on and so forth. So I think that status report would be very good, and maybe even done by a third party, so that those close to it, can learn from it as well. So those are my comments, and I'm going to support the additions to the register, except as amended.
Okay, thank you. Any other committee members? I'll look down to my right. Anyone here? Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question for staff. We, in the spring, received a letter from the Catholic Archdiocese, and they objected to the identification of a number of their properties, mainly churches, on the list or to be added to the registered list. Do you have a feeling about what their real concerns are? Is it similar to homeowners that at some point they feel that the property will become, prohibited from any major changes? I know in speaking with the Holy Cross Parish in my ward, that was their main concern, because they had some upcoming renovations, or it's within their medium-term plans, and they didn't want to be handcuffed in any way to alter their property. But is that the main theme that you're getting? I assume you've sat down with them, given the number of properties. Can you just offer some comment?
In the conversations that we had, one of the largest concerns was post-war, so anything after World War II. So modern architecture, post-war churches, religious architecture in that post-war period was something that wasn't recognized perhaps as being heritage. And so there was certainly a disagreement between our criteria and looking at what makes a modern church, or how different does it look from churches before the war, that kind of thing. And so that was one piece I took away, that perhaps we need to be more clear on why are we recognizing certain modern churches, and even a postmodern church in their case on Montreal Road, and how those tell us about our past and tell the story of our city and our buildings. I think another concern was in terms of villages, churches and parishes in some of the rural villages. If it was really hidden away on a side street, there was concern in how it met the context. And our approach for all of the villages was using the official plan village boundaries. And so if a building fell within the official plan village boundaries, we did consider it contributing to the village character. In the rural area, it is difficult sometimes when you drive to tell when did I enter the village, when did I leave it. It's just a different density. But we did stick consistently through all, I think, 26 villages to use the official plan boundaries. So in some cases, even if a Catholic parish was on a side street, we did find that it met the criteria.
Okay, I appreciate that. I just wanted to acknowledge their letter because of the quantity of properties. Again, in my ward, 685 Walkley, this is Holy Cross Roman Catholic Parish. They say that we, again, find this building to have few features that merit its including to an important tool like the registry. I am comfortable with the addition of this church on the registry, and speaking with them quite a while ago, trying to understand their concerns. Again, it was a concern that it would limit their ability to do something with a building. We know that's not the case, so I just wanted their objections noted, but this particular church, I'm okay with the addition.
Any other comments? I would like to say thank you to staff for their work over the past 3 years on this. 30,000 buildings, 12,000 photos, a citywide heritage inventory for the first time in almost 20 years of an amalgamated city. It's no small feat. And I also appreciative of the lessons learned along the way. These reports were presented in phases, and I think each time staff and councillors have learned how to properly notify, consult, listen, and engage with the public. And I think looking forward to seeing that process as a framework going forward, both for future Heritage Register reports and initiatives, but also other heritage and planning files as well. Are the report recommendations carried? Carried. Thank you. Okay, we have no in-camera items today. Are there any notices of motion for consideration at a subsequent meeting? I'm seeing none. Are there any inquiries today? Any other business? And on adjournment, is the motion carried? Carried. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. And our next meeting is December 10th, 2019. Thanks very much.